Flight attendant kicks poor boy off plane, unaware he's the airline CEO's son. The scream tore through the cabin just as the boarding door began to close. Sharp and raw, cutting through the hum of the engines like a blade. Passengers froze mid-step. A woman in a tailored blue uniform stood at the top of the aircraft stairs, her heel planted forward, her face twisted in fury as she shoved a thin, dirt-streaked boy backward. He stumbled, his worn shoes slipping on the metal edge, his hands flailing for anything to hold on to. Gasps erupted. Phones dropped. Somewhere near the window, a man whispered, "Oh my God," as the boy's body crashed hard against the steps, his cry swallowed by the roar of the plane. The boy didn't cry at first. He lay there stunned, breath knocked from his chest, eyes wide with disbelief as the flight attendant leaned over him, pointing down like a judge delivering a sentence. "You don't belong here," she snapped loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "This is a first-class flight, not a shelter." The words hit harder than the shove. The boy's lip trembled, his fingers curling into the fabric of his torn shirt as laughter, quiet at first, then unmistakable, rippled from a few seats inside the cabin. The door paused mid-close, and in that suspended second, something irreversible had begun. The boy's name was Eli, and at 12 years old, he had learned that silence was safer than protest. He pushed himself up slowly, knees shaking, dust clinging to his palms. His backpack fin frayed, holding everything he owned hung crooked from one shoulder. He looked up at the woman towering above him, her badge gleaming, her posture rigid with authority. "I have a ticket," he said softly, his voice almost lost to the wind on the tarmac. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out a folded boarding pass, creased and damp with sweat. She didn't even look at it. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she knocked it from his hand. The paper fluttered down the steps like a wounded bird. "I said get off," she barked. "We don't have time for this." Behind her, 3 other attendants stood frozen near the doorway, their expressions a mix of shock and fear, but none stepped forward. Inside the cabin, passengers craned their necks, some filming now, others turning away, pretending not to see. Eli swallowed hard. He bent down to retrieve his boarding pass, his fingers brushing the metal step just as the attendant moved again, this time deliberately blocking him with her leg. "Don't touch anything," she said coldly. "You'll delay the flight." Her eyes flicked to his muddy jeans, his scuffed shoes, his tangled hair. "People like you always do." A murmur swept through the cabin. A woman in a silk scarf covered her mouth. A businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Someone near the aisle whispered, "This is wrong." But no one stood up. No one challenged the uniform, the badge, the authority that made cruelty look like procedure. Eli straightened, his face burning. "My dad said," he began, then stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He never did. His father had taught him not to use names like shields. "Your name is heavier than you think," his dad always said. "Use it only when you must." So Eli lowered his gaze instead, nodding as if he accepted the verdict. He stepped back down the stairs, each movement slow, deliberate, the weight of 100 eyes pressing into his back. The flight attendant turned sharply toward the cabin. "Apologies for the delay," she announced brightly, her voice suddenly smooth and professional. "We had a security concern." She smiled as if nothing had happened. The door began to close again. That was when the boy stopped. "Please," Eli said, louder this time. The word echoed against the aircraft's white fuselage. The door paused once more. The attendant sighed, exasperation flashing across her face. She turned back, anger bubbling just beneath her practiced smile. "What now?" she snapped. Eli lifted his head. His eyes were wet, but steady. "I'm supposed to be on this flight," he said. "My seat is 2A. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the front rows. First class. The attendant laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Don't lie, she said. You think this is a joke? She glanced at the manifest on her tablet, scrolling quickly, then shook her head. There's no way. Before Eli could respond, a man near the aisle leaned forward. I saw his boarding pass, he said hesitantly. It did say two-way. His voice wavered as the attendant shot him a look so sharp it silenced him instantly. Sir, she said coolly, this matter is under control. She turned back to Eli, lowering her voice but not her menace. Walk away now, or airport security will escort you. Eli's chest tightened. He looked past her, into the cabin, at the faces staring back, some curious, some judgmental, some uneasy. He searched for something familiar, some sign that this nightmare would end. He didn't see it. Slowly he nodded again. He stepped down another stair, but fate wasn't finished. At the edge of the tarmac, a black sedan rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out, tall, impeccably dressed, his movements calm but purposeful. He adjusted his sunglasses, eyes lifting toward the aircraft just as the boarding door sealed shut with a final, echoing thud. The man froze. He stared at the stairs. At the boy standing alone beneath them, clutching a backpack too big for his frame. At the faint outline of a handprint already darkening on the boy's arm. The man's jaw tightened. His phone slipped from his hand, hitting the concrete with a hollow crack. Eli? He whispered. The engines roared louder, oblivious. Inside the cabin, the flight attendant exhaled, satisfied. Unaware that the decision she just made had set something monumental in motion, something that would shake the airline, the crew, and her own life to its core. And the plane hadn't even left the ground yet. Asterisk. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft taxied forward, but outside, the black sedan remained motionless, its presence like a silent accusation against the white metal body of the plane. The man standing beside it didn't move. His eyes never left the boy at the foot of the stairs. Eli stood frozen, confused by the sudden stillness of the world around him, unaware that the calm, sharply dressed stranger staring at him was the same man whose voice had guided him through bedtime stories, whose hands had taught him how to tie a knot, whose name sat quietly atop corporate buildings and billion-dollar balance sheets. Inside the cockpit, clearance was granted. The engine surged. Stop the plane. The words didn't come from the cabin. They came through the operations channel, sharp, controlled, carrying a weight that made every technician in ground control look up at once. The voice was unmistakable to anyone who had ever attended a shareholder meeting or watched a press conference. It was the voice of Daniel Cross, founder, majority owner, and CEO of Crossair, the airline that bore his name, on the tarmac. Daniel was already walking, long strides cutting across concrete, his composure held together by a thread. Do not let that aircraft leave the gate, he repeated, slower now, each word carved in steel. This is not a request. Inside the cabin, the flight attendant felt the vibration change beneath her feet as the plane slowed abruptly. Murmurs erupted. Seatbelts clicked nervously. A chime sounded overhead, followed by the captain's confused voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brief delay. Please remain seated. The attendant frowned, irritation flashing across her face. She turned toward the cockpit door, already preparing a complaint about interference and protocol, when the intercom crackled again, this time routed directly to the cabin crew. All senior attendants to the forward galley. Immediately, her stomach tightened. She straightened her uniform and marched forward, heels striking the aisle with clipped precision. The other attendants followed, exchanging uneasy glances. None of them spoke. Outside, Daniel reached Eli just as airport security began to approach. He knelt without hesitation, lowering himself to the boy's level. ignoring the stares, the cameras, the confusion rippling outward like shockwaves. "Eli," he said gently, his voice breaking through the noise. "Are you hurt?" Eli blinked. Recognition dawned slowly, disbelief flickering across his face. "Dad?" The word came out small, fragile, like it might shatter if spoken too loudly. Daniel's hands trembled as he examined his son's arm, the red mark already blooming where the shove had landed. Something dark and dangerous flashed behind his eyes, not rage yet, but the promise of it. He pulled Eli into his chest, holding him tightly, one hand cradling the back of his head. "I'm here," he whispered. "I've got you." Nearby, a ground agent stared, frozen, as realization hit. His face drained of color. He fumbled for his radio. We have a situation," he stammered. "The CEO is on the tarmac." Inside the aircraft, the forward galley felt suddenly too small. The senior purser glanced at the attendant who had shoved Eli, her expression unreadable. "We've received an order from corporate," she said carefully. "The aircraft is to remain docked." "That's impossible," the attendant snapped. "We're cleared." "We're already delayed because of—" She stopped as the purser's gaze hardened. "Because of what?" the purser asked quietly. Before the attendant could answer, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Heads turned as the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out, his face pale. "We have an executive intervention," he said. From Mr. Cross himself. The name hit like a THUNDERCLAP. The attendant laughed nervously. "That's not funny," she said. "You can't just stop a flight for—" The cabin door opened. Silence fell. Daniel Cross stepped inside. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He walked slowly down the aisle, one hand resting protectively on Eli's shoulder, his presence commanding without effort. Every passenger knew his face. Every employee knew his authority. Conversations died mid-breath. Phones lowered. Even the engine seemed to quiet in deference. Daniel stopped at the front of the cabin. He looked around once, taking in the frozen expressions, the wide eyes, the tension hanging thick in the air. Then his gaze settled on the flight attendant. "Which one of you," he asked calmly, "removed my son from this aircraft?" The question landed heavy, suffocating. No one moved. The attendant felt her mouth go dry. She straightened instinctively, years of training kicking in. "Sir," she said, forcing a professional tone, "we had a security concern." The child was— Daniel raised a hand. She stopped mid-sentence. "My son," he said, each word precise, "had a valid first-class ticket. Seat 2A. Purchased under my account." He paused. "You didn't check." The attendant swallowed. "He appeared unaccompanied," she said weakly. "And his appearance raised concerns." "His appearance," Daniel repeated softly. He turned to the nearest passenger. "You," he said. "What did you see?" The man hesitated, then cleared his throat. "I saw him show his boarding pass," he said. "And I saw him get pushed." A woman across the aisle nodded. "She told him he didn't belong," she added, voice shaking. It was humiliating. Daniel listened without expression. Then he looked back at the attendant. "Did you push him?" The attendant's eyes flicked to the purser, to the captain, to the watching passengers. There was no escape. "I escorted him off," she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Did you push my son?" A long, unbearable pause. "Yes," she whispered. Something shifted in the cabin. Not an explosion, something colder. Daniel inhaled slowly. "This flight," he said, turning toward the captain, "is canceled." Gasps erupted. "Canceled?" Someone exclaimed. "We have connections." Daniel raised his voice just enough to be heard. "This aircraft will not move until a full internal investigation is launched." Every passenger will be rebooked at no cost. Compensation will be issued. He turned back to the attendant. As for you, he said quietly, you are suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you off this plane. The attendant's face crumpled. You can't, she began, panic bleeding through her composure. It was a misunderstanding. Daniel knelt again, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. My son learned something today, he said, eyes never leaving hers. So did you. Security appeared at the aisle, firm but silent. As they took the attendant by the arm, she looked around desperately, searching for support. She found none. Eli clutched his father's jacket, heart pounding, still trying to understand how everything had turned so fast. Daniel squeezed his hand gently. This isn't over, he murmured, not just to Eli, but to everyone listening, because what had happened on those stairs wasn't just a mistake, that it was a crack in a system, built on assumptions, and Daniel Cross was about to break it wide open. Asterisk. By the time dawn broke over the city, the story had already escaped the confines of the terminal. Clips from phones shot in shaky frames raced across social media. A boy stumbling on metal stairs, a uniformed foot stepping forward, a man in a dark suit striding through the cabin with a hand on a child's shoulder. No captions were needed. Names filled the silence on their own. Crosshair, CEO, son. Word kicked repeated like a bruise you couldn't stop. Pressing. Daniel Cross watched. The feeds without sound from a glass-walled conference room at headquarters. The building hummed awake beneath him, executives arriving early, assistants whispering, security tightening. He sat at the head of the table, Eli beside him with a cup of cocoa cooling between his palms. The boy's eyes kept flicking to the door, as if he expected someone to burst in again and tell him he didn't belong. Daniel noticed. He placed his phone face down. You're safe, he said quietly. No one gets to move you without my say. Eli nodded, but the nod was small. The legal team arrived first, binders snapping open. HR followed. Operations, PR. Each face wore the same tight mask. The head of HR began, voice steady. We've suspended the attendant pending investigation. Our policies. Don't summarize policy to me, Daniel said, still calm. Show me the timeline. The screens lit up. Boarding scan. Seat assignment. A flagged note unaccompanied minor incorrectly. Auto-applied by an algorithm after Eli had stepped away to use the restroom before boarding, his father delayed at security. A cascade of assumptions flowed from that single error. The attendant's manual override, the refusal to verify, the physical removal, and the shove? Daniel asked. Silence. The purser cleared her throat. That was not authorized, she said. We trained de-escalation. There is no justification. Daniel nodded once. Who approved the override? A name appeared. The attendant. Her file pulled up beside commendations, punctuality, a few minor complaints dismissed as passenger sensitivity. Then another tab opened. Prior incidents, patterns, words like tone, demeanor, felt unwelcome repeated across years, never rising high enough to trigger action. Daniel leaned back. You saw this, he said to HR, and you filed it away. We followed procedure, HR replied carefully. Daniel's eyes lifted. Procedure followed my son down a flight of stairs. The room stilled. Daniel turned to operations. Pull every complaint like this from the last 5 years. Not just hers. Anyone who made a passenger feel small because it was easier than checking. PR shifted in their seats. Daniel, the director began, choosing the first name as if it might soften the air. We need to control the narrative. Apology, restitution, training commitment. We will tell the truth, Daniel said. and then we will fix it." Outside the room, Crossair employees gathered in clusters, eyes glued to screens. Inside the training center across town, instructors paused mid-session as alerts pings. At the airport where it had happened, staff walked past the stairs with a new awareness. As if the metal remembered. The attendant, meanwhile, sat in a small office with a security guard by the door, hands shaking. She had replayed the moment again and again, searching for a version where it looked different, where it was just protocol, where the boy's face wasn't there when she closed her eyes. When HR entered, she straightened, rehearsed explanations spilling out. "I thought he didn't look. There was pressure. We were late. We're not here for explanations," the investigator said. "We're here for facts." Back at headquarters, Daniel took Eli to a quiet room with windows that overlooked the city. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. Eli stared at the traffic far below. "She said I was lying," he said finally. "She said kids like me tried to get free rides." Daniel felt something twist. "What did you do?" "I showed her the ticket. I said my dad was coming." He swallowed. "She didn't listen." Daniel nodded. "Listening is a job requirement," he said. "So is respect." The board convened by noon. Some joined remotely, others in person, faces framed by the city's skyline. The chair cleared his throat. "This incident is serious," he began. "It is systemic," Daniel corrected. "And we are responsible." A board member frowned. "You're emotionally involved." "I am involved," Daniel said. "So are our passengers. So is our reputation. If you think those are separable, you shouldn't be here." He laid out the changes without raising his voice. Mandatory verification steps that could not be overridden without a second signature. Body cameras for boarding staff. Real consequences tied to patterns of complaints, not single incidents. An independent passenger advocate with authority to halt operations. And a public forum live where affected passengers could speak. PR inhaled sharply. "Live? Yes," Daniel said. "Unedited." "Daniel," another board member said, cautious, "this could open us to litigation." Daniel met his gaze. "We will face what we've done." Outside, reporters gathered. Inside the city, radio hosts debated. Some voices defended the attendant's stressful job, split-second decisions. Others asked why stress always seemed to flow downhill. The video looped. The foot, the stumble, the hand on the rail that slipped out at the airport. A woman approached the same stairs with her mother in a wheelchair. She hesitated, then smiled as an attendant knelt to adjust the footrests, careful, gentle. Word travels fast when fear changes sides. That afternoon, Daniel stood at the podium in the atrium, cameras trained on him. Eli sat in the front row with a Crossair jacket draped over his shoulders, too big, the sleeves covering his hands. Daniel spoke without notes. "What happened to my son," he said, "was wrong. It happened because the system allowed assumptions to replace verification, and because behavior that made people feel small was tolerated. That ends today." Questions came hard and fast. Is the attendant fired? Is this performative? Why did it take your son for you to act? Daniel didn't dodge. She is terminated for cause, he said. This is not performative. And it should not have taken my son. I own that failure. The room buzzed. Eli watched his father's hands as he spoke, steady now. For the first time since the stairs, his shoulders eased. Then a reporter raised a phone. We've received messages, she said, from passengers describing similar treatment. Will you meet them? Yes, Daniel said. Today. They came in waves. A college student who had been told her accent was suspicious. A veteran whose service dog was questioned until tears blurred his eyes. A mother who had been asked to step aside because her clothes didn't look first class. Each story landed like a stone. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. Eli listened too. He realized, slowly, that what happened to him wasn't a secret he had to carry. It was a door others were walking through. As evening fell, Daniel returned to the conference room. The legal team looked exhausted. "We're exposed," one said. Daniel nodded. "We're also learning." The investigator returned with findings. "There's more," she said. The attendant altered the incident report after the fact. Remove the physical contact. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was quiet. "Refer it to authorities." A murmur rippled. PR stiffened. "Daniel, accountability," he said, "is not a slogan." That night, as Eli slept at home, Daniel stood by the window and watched planes trace white lines across the dark. He thought of the stairs, of how easily a child could be pushed from belonging to nowhere. And he understood something with cold clarity. Power didn't matter unless it reached the ground. Tomorrow, there would be consequences. Not just for one attendant. For an entire culture that had learned to look away. The reckoning did not arrive with sirens or spectacle. It arrived with something far more dangerous to people who relied on silence-visibility. By sunrise, Crosshair's headquarters felt less like a corporate building and more like a courthouse without walls. The atrium, usually reserved for glossy product launches and investor mixers, was stripped of branding. No banners. No slogans. Just rows of chairs, microphones, and a single long table beneath the skylight. Sunlight poured down, exposing everything. There would be nowhere to hide today. Employees arrived first. Some wore uniforms, others business suits. Many came with folded arms, defensive, uncertain. Then passengers began to arrive, some invited directly, others who had driven overnight after seeing the announcement. They carried folders, phones, printed emails, screenshots saved for years because no one had listened before. Security did not stop them. They were waved in. Daniel Cross stood at the edge of the atrium, not elevated, not centered. He wore no tie. His phone buzzed constantly. Board members, politicians, partners, but he ignored it. Today did not belong to power. It belonged to truth. The independent passenger advocate stepped forward. Her voice was calm, unyielding. "This is not a press conference," she said. "This is a public accountability hearing. Anyone who speaks will be heard. No one will be interrupted. No retaliation will be tolerated." The first person to approach the microphone was not a passenger. It was a Crosshair employee. A middle-aged baggage handler removed his cap, hands trembling. "I've worked here 19 years, he said. "I've seen supervisors laugh when passengers complained. I've been told they'll forget by tomorrow." His voice cracked. "I stopped reporting things because it didn't matter." A murmur rippled through the room. Then a flight attendant spoke, not the one who had shoved Eli, but another, younger, pale. "We're trained on smiles and scripts," she said. "But when we're understaffed and behind schedule, empathy is the first thing that disappears. We're rewarded for speed, not for kindness." Daniel listened without moving. Each word landed like a weight, but he did not deflect it. Passengers followed. A woman described being escorted off a plane because her English was imperfect. A veteran described being questioned repeatedly about his service dog until he broke down in front of strangers. A teenage girl described being told her clothes didn't match her seat. Each story was different. Each story carried the same wound: being judged unworthy without being seen. The advocate turned to Daniel. "Do you understand the scope now?" Daniel nodded once. "I do." The investigator presented her findings next. The screen behind her filled with timelines, internal emails, ignored complaints. Patterns emerged, certain routes, certain supervisors, certain language repeated again and again. Words like suspicious, doesn't fit, use discretion. And finally, the investigator said, the incident report related to the child removed from Flight 217. It was altered after submission to remove physical contact. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the atrium. The attendant has been terminated for cause. The investigator continued. The alteration has been referred to authorities. This is no longer an internal matter. Cameras flashed. But Daniel did not react. He had already accepted this moment days ago. When he finally stepped to the podium, the room fell silent, not because he demanded it, but because everyone needed to hear what came next. I built this company believing efficiency and excellence would take care of the rest, Daniel said. I was wrong. Excellence without humanity is just cruelty with good branding. He did not apologize vaguely. He named failures. He named blind spots. He named himself. I did not create the moment on those stairs, he said, but I created the environment where it could happen. That responsibility is mine. A reporter shouted, "Isn't this only happening because it was your son?" Daniel turned toward the voice. "It should not have taken my son," he said steadily. "But it did, and because it did, it will never be dismissed again." He laid out consequences, not promises, but actions already signed and funded. Independent oversight with real authority. Policy changes that could not be overridden by pressure. Performance reviews tied to dignity metrics. Bonuses reduced or eliminated when patterns of harm appeared, regardless of revenue. From today, Daniel said, any employee can halt. A boarding process without penalty if a passenger's dignity is at risk. Speed will never outrank humanity again. Applause rose, not loud, not celebratory, but sustained. The sound of something resetting. That evening, Daniel went home to a quiet house. Eli sat at the kitchen table, drawing airplanes. One had a big red X over the stairs. Another had a ramp. Another had a smiling stick figure waving from the door. They listened today, Eli said softly. They did. Daniel replied. I want to talk tomorrow, Eli added. Just a little. Daniel hesitated, not because he doubted his son, but because he knew how heavy words could be. Only if you want, he said. I want, Eli said. I don't want other kids to think they did something wrong. The next morning, Eli stood on a small platform beside the advocate. His feet barely touched the stool. The room leaned in. When I was pushed, Eli said, voice shaking but clear, I thought I was bad. I thought maybe I didn't belong. He swallowed. My dad told me I always belong. He looked out at the crowd. If you're not sure about someone, you can ask. Asking is better than hurting. No applause followed at first. Just silence. The kind that comes when people recognize truth without defense. Then people stood. Employees, passengers, executives. One by one. Change did not come all at once. It came in systems rewritten, habits broken, quiet decisions made differently. Complaints decreased, not because voices were silenced, but because fewer people were harmed. Other airlines called. Some resisted. Some followed. Weeks later, Daniel and Eli boarded another Crossair flight. The gate agent checked the ticket. Carefully, smiled genuinely, and bent slightly to Eli's level. Welcome aboard, she said as they walked down the jet bridge. Eli squeezed his father's hand, not in fear, but in certainty. At cruising altitude, Daniel looked around the cabin. People were reading, sleeping, trusting. He understood now that trust was the real currency of flight. When they landed, applause came from the back of the plane. Unplanned. UNFORCED. Eli smiled. The boy who had been pushed off a plane had changed an airline not through revenge, but by being seen. And the company that once looked away had learned. that the cost of ignoring dignity was far greater than any delay.